All right. You're up.
Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. So let me put this in. Oops, not share. That was not what I wanted. If it will load. Okay. So I think most of the people on this call are relatively familiar with the story I want to tell for this presentation. So I'd like to make this as informal as we can. And so if you want to ask a question, just interrupt me. I can't actually see the Zoom UI, so like raising your hand and stuff won't work. Just stop me and feel free to ask questions throughout. But the goal is to talk about a successful like DevOps transformation that we did at a project over the last 3 years. And one of the reasons we were extremely successful was the choice of technology that we used to drive that change. And really the technology became synonymous with the adoption of DevOps, and that whole process was extremely interesting. And how we succeeded, the places that we could have done better, and that slowed us down and whatnot, are all really interesting. And I want to share some of that and hopefully get some other people's thoughts on the whole thing. So about me, I've been working in the DevOps SRE kind of space for about 6 years. I started life as a software developer, and like I've been spending the last 3-4 months doing nothing but writing code, and it's awesome. I love it. It's what I like to do. But when I over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of going into new organizations and trying to figure out what's actually hurting, what's causing pain, what's preventing this place from actually working and making it miserable for everyone that's working here, and trying to make life better. And that's kind of become my real passion in life, and I'm hoping to continue getting better at that whole process. So currently I'm at a distributed data storage company. We build a mobile first SDK right now that does fully distributed, almost asynchronous data storage. So if you have 2 phones that are both running copies of this of our SDK, you'll be able to share documents and data back and forth between the phones whenever they're able to communicate with each other over all kinds of different network types, and crazy stuff like Bluetooth Low Energy to network stuff together, or Wi-Fi direct to kind of push data from one system to another. And specifically, they brought me in because they're trying to build a cloud component so that companies that want a more resilient data store have that opportunity. And so we're building the backend side of the application right now. And then just like a non-technical thing, my favorite new book is The Traitor Baru Cormorant by Seth Dickinson. It's about a young woman who decides that the best way to take down the evil empire is to join it and take it down from within. And it's a very, very, very good story with an extremely gripping ending. And that's all I'll say about it.
I think that's what
spoilers.
I think that's what Alan Crouch might be doing at Steampunk, by the way.
Probably. So about this project, I'm not going to name names, even though most of the people on here know what I'm talking about. I'd like to be able to speak more honestly and freely, and I can do that better if I don't use any names. But they're a healthcare software company. They produce a portal that collects patient data and just regular data from regular people in order to build a database that will eventually be able to support all kinds of research doing predictive medicine. So they have about 10 development teams and about 40 code repos. The operations team is, when I started, it was 3 people. And when I left, it was somewhere between 10 and 15 people. So we're talking about almost 10 to 1 developers to actual operations people, which is always tough. Interesting things about this particular project is that they don't just build an application. They build an application for a particular customer, But the way they do that is they have a platform that they've actually built that designs these portals and these sites. And so they build the platform and then they build the application on top of it. One of their struggles is that they have a single government customer, and that's their primary customer that brings in most of their revenue, like 99% of the revenue or something, which means there's a lot of pressure to deliver features for that customer, and there aren't a ton of pressures to build the platform correctly in the direction that they would like things to evolve in the future. So they're always trading the present against the future. And yeah, so they're in the process of trying to expand to more customers. Last I heard, as of a month or so ago, they had kind of succeeded and they were starting to pick up new customers. And the reason they're able to do that is kind of what we did here and the operational transformation that we kind of achieved. So when I got there 3 years ago, I think it was exactly 3 years ago, so like August 2017, they were in a very painful place. They hadn't actually launched their production application yet. They were just trying to get that up. They were at a vaguely monthly release cycle. They kind of have gone back and forth between different release cycles like over time. But they primarily, like the biggest thing was that some of the deployments, like they would just like go over by a month, right? Like when I first started, it took them a full month to get like an environment working or a new release deployed into production, and it was extremely painful. And so the development teams were always in a place of like, we'd like to do more stuff. We'd like to be able to test our features more quickly, but we can't do that as long as the application is so hard to deploy. And so they kind of went on their own and started building stuff with Docker to try and build themselves like local test environments that were a little bit more complete and had all of the little pieces that the application needs to actually be able to run. So that piece had already been done when we first started. And oh, I should also say, when I say we here, I'm talking about a team of maybe 3-4 people at any given time. Several of the people on this call have at various points participated in that team, but it was, we kind of focused on the CI/CD and the interplay between development and operations. And yeah, so a few of us were contractors all the time. A few of us were, employees of the customer. So when we started, they were using the cloud already. They were hosting everything on AWS, and they weren't using the cloud in like an elastic kind of scalable way, right? What they were trying to do was allocate a fixed pool of servers in a bunch of fixed, behind a bunch of fixed load balancers, and just just enough for redundancy, but big enough servers that whatever the load they were going to get, they would be able to survive it. And that was all set up by hand. None of this was done through like Terraform or anything else. And it meant that while deployments themselves were automated to varying degrees, it was a very manual first kind of development environment for the operations teams. They would build everything out by hand, get it working, and then maybe script it after the fact if they had time. And as time went on, they had less and less and less time as the rate of change coming out of the development team started to increase faster than they could really keep up with. The adoption of those Docker environments was actually extremely poor. Really, it was only the team lead who had built those environments that was really using them. So we knew they were there, and one of the first things we did was push those into onto servers and set up environments with those Docker Compose files. And that was our first pass at actually doing CI. We used that as our first pass for CI/CD. But we knew very, very quickly that we couldn't take that to production because it's not really designed to be scalable. It's not designed to be robust and resilient to all kinds of different failure modes. We still had to do coordination of disks, and it meant deploying literally everything onto the same server, just a bunch of stuff that was just not going to work in the long run. And so we knew we were going to need Kubernetes because even at this point in time, there were 10 separate components that all had relatively finicky networking requirements. Different things needed data storage. And so we knew we were going to need something like Kubernetes to deal with orchestration for us. And so we brought in Kubernetes. So we ended up focusing on CI/CD as the early adopter for this Kubernetes platform in two ways. The first was that the code coming out of the development teams was seeing extremely little testing. And so we used CI/CD to basically integrate the also ongoing at that time automated test efforts. And we, we built out a Jenkins-based like pipeline platform that allowed us to onboard new repos relatively quickly. And we put a lot of effort into making sure that we could onboard new repos pretty fast. And initially, all of that was like all the Jenkins servers and everything was deployed on like fixed servers that we just had like a pool of for CI/CD's use. And we ended up moving that onto Kubernetes, and it ended up becoming it is still to this day their largest workload on Kubernetes. It's probably about 4 times the size of their production environment, and the QA cluster is still it's between 100 and 200 nodes, which is one of the larger Kubernetes clusters that I've heard of people trying to operate. And it led to all kinds of really interesting and deep technical challenges to actually figure out. And we got to do it all within the CI/CD kind of environment there, because we chose that to deal with the automated deployments, and we ended up moving all of CI/CD onto it. The other thing we did with Kubernetes was set up, because we could deploy an environment relatively quickly, we ended up setting up feature testing environments on Kubernetes. And so we set up a Jenkins job that anyone on the development, QA, operations teams could go and press the right button, set up the right pieces of data and functionality, and then click go. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, they would have a fully functional environment deployed just for them to test whatever branch of code that they were working on. So of course, this wasn't all roses. There was a lot of pain, as I'm sure many of the people on this call can attest. A lot of this came down to a test strategy that kind of inverted the testing pyramid. Max can probably talk about this so much more than I can, but basically we ended up with a test suite of end-to-end functional automated tests, but that was the only real large and developed test code base that actually existed. Unit testing was poorly adopted. Integration testing of individual or pairs of components was basically non-existent, and everything, all of the testing we were able to do of the application really came down to the end-to-end functional tests, which meant that in order to do any testing of the application, you had to deploy the entire application, which of course meant that the application became deeply, deeply coupled. And so we had to put in place very early on, basically a versioning and release packaging system that dealt with that coupling and treated all of the different application code repos as part of the same application. So we didn't end up taking a monolithic application and breaking it down into microservices. We just broke it down into a distributed monolith. And we knew this was happening, and there's been a bunch of arguments that we've had over the years about whether we should have just allowed things to break down and not enforce this strict versioning that the test strategy was kind of pushing on us, and instead basically allowed components to drift from each other and deal with the breakage by kind of pushing that pain on the development teams. But I think if we had done that, we wouldn't have actually been able to take this platform to production without having kind of solved all of the problems up front. Whereas they're able to now kind of come back to that core problem, and they've started working on, the development teams themselves have decided that this is a real issue that they want to tackle, and have started to take it on for themselves to actually break down the application into real microservices. And so that's been an interesting change since we took Kubernetes to production earlier this year.
Hey, Cassandra,
yeah,
real quick question about that point. That monolithic application to distributed monolith, with like all the caveats in between about whether we go to microservices, why we should, why we won't, why we shouldn't.
Yep.
That in itself could be an entire talk, I
Yep.
think. I mean, that would be really fascinating to learn and hear about the challenges you guys encountered, the decisions you made, why you made them, everybody's different perspectives, whether we agree with them or not. Like, I think that would be a really interesting space to explore with the team, because there's a lot of schools of thought on that, obviously. I think a lot of people think, you know, start with microservices. A lot of people think that's a little bit of heresy. So it's just an area that I'd love to drill into with you guys.
Yeah, definitely. The main driving factor behind it was that the monolithic application was already, I think, like a few 100,000 lines of code, and it was just becoming too much for all these different teams to work on together, because like the merge conflicts were getting too bad. And so the development teams wanted to split up the code repos. And so they were moving towards microservices, whether they like whatever anyone else really wanted, just like because they needed to do so, just to deal with the complexity of the application. But that meant that they, by not like being careful about how they did that, and by not taking the test strategy as seriously as they should have, they ended up kind of coupling everything together, and you know, building the worst of both worlds kind of a thing. The distributed monolith is extremely hard to deploy, and it's extremely hard to make functional. In order to get, like, I think the configuration in the end was like the amount of like YAML files to configure the application was something like thousands of lines of YAML to like actually set all of the different you know, variables and whatnot to make any given environment actually function.
Yeah, right on. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions about that?
Maybe your experience is different, but my experience is that distributed monoliths tend to happen because people don't make their microservices truly independent. In other words, they don't truly adopt the paradigm shift that comes with microservices, and that's how they get themselves into that pickle. What are your observations?
So people were relatively,
from?
Yeah, so people were relatively aware of that problem going into it. And so one of the things they did here was kind of push everything, like all of the interaction between components, into Kafka, and use that as a message passing system to deal with the different components. But the problem was it was never tested independently. And so like it only all worked together in like very tightly coupled ways. Like, for example, no one defined like schemas for the messages that they were sending on the Kafka bus, right? And so if you put two different versions of the application up together, and if they weren't tested together to actually work, you didn't know if the messages that were going on the bus had changed their schemas, and so the application would just stop functioning in very subtle ways that were hard to see until you triggered particular workflows.
The very description of what you described means that there's a coupling between services.
Correct.
That's not going noticed. And
Correct.
I think that in that world, and maybe your experience is different, and please correct me if you think differently, but I think coupling in that world is bad.
It is extremely bad, and it was something we pushed back on as much as we could, but the pressures of the organization just kind of kept things moving forward in the direction they were going, right? There was still like a huge pressure to deliver features for this big government customer. And so that meant that the architectural concerns about the coupling and the test strategy just kind of got lost in the shuffle. The other thing is that it's easy in principle to try to decouple like a complicated application like this, but without the like constant testing and gating to catch coupling as it's introduced, you end up with shortcuts that are being taken at various points that end up reintroducing coupling just constantly. And so that was kind of the main thing that we noticed, was that until and unless we could actually catch people introducing coupling, we were never going to get this application fully decoupled.
Yeah, I think that you know, when you hear cloud, a lot of times what people really mean is data center on Azure or data center on AWS. like you said. And I think when people say microservices, a lot of times what they really do mean is, distributed monolith. And I know I went to a talk on some of the, was the unspoken downsides of microservices. And one of the problems he said he found out that nobody had mentioned to him was, every time they deployed one, they had to deploy all of their microservices. Every time they made a change to one of the microservices, they needed to change the database, which meant they need to update all the other microservices. Versioning wasn't near the problem that most people thought of, because, they put a version on the whole thing because they all had to go together anyway. And I walked out of there, and a lot of people did try to call attention to it as he was presenting that, what you did was you built a distributed monolith, but it wasn't even that he didn't even realize that that's what he's done. At least it sounds like, here they were aware that, or at least you guys were aware that was
Yeah.
You were accepting the pain of that because there were other problems.
Yeah. Accepting the pain of that is really the real thing. We knew we were building a distributed monolith, and it was just like one too many fights in another sense, right? We were already getting a lot of flack because the end-to-end functional tests were brittle and they'd break, and so people would go blame the the actual platform, the Kubernetes platform, and say, oh, this must be the thing that's causing the problem because it works somewhere else, and so we ended up having to kind of let this one kind of slide, even though it was such a deep and core problem because it was just too big to fix. And now that they have kind of moved all the way into the a Kubernetes world, they've kind of circled back to it, and the development teams themselves are kind of leading the effort to solve that problem. So.
In retrospect, do you think that letting it slide as a battle to be fought another day was the right move, or do you think it could have been fought at the time?
It could have been fought at the time, but I think there was a real risk of trying to change too much all at once. You can only tell people what the right thing to do is so much. At some point, they kind of have to decide for themselves that they want to come along to the new and better place. And one of the things we really had to learn to do was let a lot of these things sit until people were ready to hear about the actual problems. And by doing that, what we found is that we got to actually have those conversations, as the organization changed, and as we kind of pushed this pain, the pain of these things into the right places so that people could actually deal with things that they had the, both the authority and the knowledge to actually deal with and fix. Because otherwise, you end up with something where the operations team is responsible for deploying an application that they can't possibly have any knowledge of how to run, and that was one of the deepest problems that we had to tackle.
Yeah, that jibes with my experience. There's sort of a chicken or the egg thing, where developments can't do the architecture, can't do the surgery required without a well-functioning ops system, right? If you don't even have CI, you can't make the kind of refactoring you need to do to split off into microservices.
Yep. And if the the test suite isn't robust and deep, that refactoring is hard to validate for a release. And we ran into that kind of stuff so many times over the years. So we ended up hitting a tipping point. I want to say this was about a year ago now, where we went from people saying, well, this works on the old QA environments, so it's Kubernetes' fault that it doesn't work, right? So it's it's your team's fault that it's not working, to suddenly the fingers getting pointed to the ops teams, where people were saying, well, this works in the Kubernetes environments because I could get it working there. I can't get it working in the old environments, so it must be their fault that it's not working. Why can't you make it work? And that shift happened I want to say all at once, in 1 week. The week before we were hearing one thing, and the week after we were hearing the other, and it was kind of crazy to actually see it happen in real time, because I did not expect to see it happen that way. I thought it would be a slower and more methodical shift, but it wasn't. It was something that happened, all at once. And as soon as that happened, go ahead.
So my question is, having been there for a little bit of time, is how far did your jaw actually drop when that happened?
Pretty far, because that was unbelievable. Given how much like there was like a real blame culture. There still is a real blame culture problem there, right? And people are always looking for a reason that they can't get stuff done because like the fact that they're working on an impossible schedule to impossible deadlines like can't possibly be the thing that they talk about. And so instead they bring up like, oh, it must be the CI/CD team's fault. It must be the operations team's fault that we can't deliver code. When in reality, it's like a whole organization-wide problem that's very complicated and took 3 years just to, like make a decent dent on.
Yeah, the death march is a tried and true pattern.
There was a bit of a death march getting this one out the door too, the Kubernetes platform. That was painful.
It never results in burnout or problem.
Never ever. And the main thing is that like the adoption itself took time, patience, and a lot of like education, teaching the development teams especially to kind of go fix things for themselves rather than waiting for other people to fix things for them. But as soon as we like laid those bricks, like the whole foundation just kind of appeared all on its own very, very quickly, much faster than we thought it was actually going to. It just took us time to realize like who we needed to educate and what education they actually needed in order to actually enable that shift.
So my question is, what type of education techniques did you find successful, or was it a very something that you had to craft for the individual personalities, or did you find like if we do this one thing, people are more willing to listen to us or accept our ideas?
It was about 3 or 4 different things that we ended up trying. Part of it was taking each team and doing very detailed deep dives into like how the platform actually functioned, so that they could learn about Kubernetes and Helm and all the other tools that we were using, but also so that they could get some experience playing with it and practicing it. And this took like full days of like just sequestering a team in a conference room and walking through presentations, but also doing hands-on kind of exercises with them on things that they had recently struggled with. The second thing was like not doing initially we would like get bug reports from people like, oh, this this CI/CD build failed, right? And tell me why it failed. Tell me what to do to fix it, right? And they'd come to us like that. And it took a long time, especially for like more junior people like Amrith struggled with this for a long time, just like doing it because like people were coming and like bothering them about it, and wanting to help them becomes a doing it for them kind of a thing. And so we learned as a team to stop doing that and to really force people to go figure it out for themselves. And that was the second major piece of this. And then the last thing was taking the development architects and doing real deep sessions with them on how things were being designed, why they were being designed the way that they were, which were conversations that we passed on initially because we didn't have good relationships with the development architects. But over time that changed, and they ended up becoming, real advocates of the work we were doing because we took the time to talk to them and hear their concerns and hash out problematic things with them. And so, yeah, communication was, I think, the biggest thing.
How much of the adoption do you think was driven by, the devs started getting into it because they were playing with some new tech that they were just starting to understand, or they got enough of it that they could see it, or how much of it was, they were seeing the advantages of it, or was it just you beating it into them by repeating it over and over? I mean, what do you think which do you think was the most effective education?
So we thought it would be the first two, right? We thought people would be excited by the cool new technology. We thought people would be excited by, this almost fully functional prototype that they really with a little bit of elbow grease, they could make actually functional. And there's a pleasure in making things work. And we thought those things would drive people, but they didn't. there was like too much of, like, I think this is a organization-wide problem that they're still struggling with. There's too much of a pressure on on the teams to deliver new features for this single customer, which meant that doing things right always had to take a seat to doing things as fast as possible. And so,
How much do you think being able to blame and the easiest path to blame factored into that?
yeah, a lot. That was the entire thing. And it came down to, we gave them just enough education and talked to them and pestered them enough that they started trying to do things on their own. And as soon as they started doing things on their own, the easiest thing became dealing with our system, and we became the shortest path to getting things done, versus the old way of throw it over the wall and make somebody else do it for you. Actually ended up becoming more time consuming and more painful. And I think that's what really drove this shift.
Yeah, Max wanted to chime in and when it's not the environment's fault, it must be the tests.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did 12-factor design principles ever come up at all, or what, in your discussions with the development architects or the application architects, or is that just a concept that you didn't quite fall on?
We didn't end up leaning on that as a concept. There were more like extremely basic problems with the architecture of the application, because like in a lot of ways, nobody had really taken the time to do any architecture. Like, there were development architects and they were in theory doing like architecture and design work, but at no point were they actually working with the operations team and with the CI/CD system to make all that happen. And so there was just like a core communication breakdown. And so we didn't even get to things like 12-factor quite yet, because there was just like that like much more basic problem of like, you don't even know what you're building and everything is just kind of evolving in the way that it like is easiest rather than in the way that's best.
All right,
Does that
thank
make
you.
sense? All right. And then what we found is that as soon as that tipping point actually happened and people started to take the the new environments, the Kubernetes environments more seriously, the rate of change from the development teams just kind of exploded. They started to produce new code repos and new services at the rate of like a half dozen per monthly release, and the ops team just like could not keep up. Like, we almost had to scrap 3 separate releases in the same in a 3-month span because of like just the rate of change being like way too much for those teams to actually handle. And so as soon as that happened, after the second time that we almost scrapped release, the organization, like from the top down at every level, just immediately made the call that we had to shift the platform over to Kubernetes immediately. And so there had been like, over the preceding year, a lot of talk about, yeah, we should do this someday, but that's going to be like many releases from now, right? Like it's always like 6 months away at least. It was never something that people wanted to pick up and start taking seriously and start working on. But the whole organization decided like together that this was something we had to do just to survive any longer. And so we took the next 3-4 months to get the Kubernetes platform, like take it from being a prototype into an actual production deployment. And that was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but it finally happened, and the new world looks a lot better. I've talked a little bit about some of these pieces already, so I'm going to skip this, especially because we're coming up on time. And so what the place we actually ended up looks very cool, and it's a relatively modern platform at this point. The full Kubernetes clusters ended up becoming fully GitOps. They're working on CI/CD, like actual testing for the infrastructures, because they can deploy clusters dynamically and deploy all the different components on them and do basic kinds of testing to determine if changes to the infrastructure are going to work. They've moved all of their monitoring and their like actual policies for giving people and services access all into code. So there's a couple of tools that I've like listed out here that we ended up using to do that. We used to keep all of our secrets in Git, which is obviously a horrible thing to do, but that was what the operations team had been doing for a long time, and there was no real secrets management going on. And as part of this shift, we forced everyone to move all their secrets into HashiCorp Vault, such that we could dynamically inject all of the secrets into runtime, into the pods at runtime. And yeah, so all of the environments, all the clusters, everything is driven out of a single code repo that captures the values that that aren't secret, and then all of the values that are secret get injected in from Vault. And so it's a fully GitOps model. If you want to deploy a change to an environment at this point, you open a pull request. If you want to make a change to a cluster, you open a couple of pull requests, and that's how it actually goes. And it's really nice to see it, and it felt really good to get all of the pieces together and get all of that actually functional.
So
go ahead.
So secrets management always intrigues me, and one of my questions is, were you able to reduce the surface area of the number of secrets you had to keep using implicit IAM or other cloud native solutions besides just HashiCorp Vault?
Yeah, we didn't tackle that problem yet. That's something that they're working on now, I believe, and that they're looking at now. Up to that point and up to doing the policy as code work, they were largely building IAM services by hand and IAM roles by hand and assigning the credentials out manually and then trying to roll them manually. So a lot of that, Vault does a lot of that management for you. You can ask Vault to deal with AWS and IAM for you if you give it the right policies. And so that's a lot of the policy as code work that ended up happening. But no, we didn't end up using the cloud first tools that you're talking about. Other questions?
How much do you think that would have helped, or would have been yet another set of changes that they just weren't ready for and too many things changing at once? Like going to the cloud native stuff.
So because Vault could do a lot of it for us, it was actually more about like, what do we have time to get done in the amount of time that we have? Like it'd be really nice to also do this, but it also means doing like one set of things one way and another set of things another way. And there's only like 2 people working on this entire piece, and it was just faster and easier to ask Vault to do it for us and set up Vault to deal with all the credentials management than it was to also set up a separate mechanism like through like IAM, Cube to IAM or whatever to manage that for us. I think it was just a trade-off in terms of time. Cool. I think that's the end of it. That's all I had for you guys. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to stick around for the panel, so that's also a good time to do that.
All right. Well, thank you. So the plan is to transition this into a panel right now. 2 other people we have with us that you've already heard from a little bit. We have Tom Stiehm. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Tom Stiehm. I work for a company called Coveros. I've been doing Agile and DevOps. I started doing Agile in 2002, and then DevOps in the 20-teens. And worked on a lot of different kinds of transformations. So here to talk to anyone that wants to talk about Agile or DevOps transformation, digital transformation.
Sure. And Tom has been part of a lot of government, federal government, quasi-government, big organizations doing changes that have made pretty much every mistake that you guys could predict and have lived through as well.
Twice.
Yeah. All right. And Alan.
Yeah, my name is Alan Crouch. I'm the DevSecOps Practice Lead at Steampunk, and like Tom, I've worked in a lot of commercial and government and quasi-government organizations, helping them adopt Agile and DevSecOps. Some of those I've worked with Tom on, actually.
Yes. So he was part of at least half of my mistakes.
All right. So I guess the floor is open. I know Cassandra is willing to answer more questions and stuff too, but we can talk more about specifics about that one project or other projects we've seen. If anybody has any questions, I've got tons. So if anybody wants to start before me, let's go ahead. All right, I'll go ahead and kick one off. So I guess for all of you, what the biggest mistake that you see being made, or the maybe not the biggest mistake, the mistake that you see being made in DevOps adoptions or Kubernetes adoptions that would have been easy to avoid?
I'll let Tom and Alan go first since I just spent the last half hour talking about
I mean, the thing that I see again and again is de-emphasizing test automation, right? So if your goal is to push software through your pipeline quickly and have confidence that it works, I don't see how you're going to do that without test automation. I generally see DevOps transformation getting boiled down to, and now we're going to do CI/CD where we automate deployments and configuration, and we forget about the test automation part. And then people come back and, they get some value out of it, right? There's value in having automated deployments and builds and configuration, but you're not getting what was promised. And yet at the same time, they still don't want to invest in test automation.
I think the other big part is culture, right? And that's the problem with all of them is testing is definitely a big one, but the other is like willingness to make changes, willingness to work together to solve problems. Adopting Kubernetes or any kind of DevOps transformation is kind of pivotal to have people work together to make it successful. You can't do it in a silo.
To riff off of that, I think the biggest culture change problem is not changing how you incent people, right? So if you don't give people a reason to change, they're not going to change. And the way you do that is with your incentive system, which is, how you reward and punish people for the behavior they have.
Well, and I think that gets to something that Cassandra brought up, the blame culture. And I know some of us have heard Dot Graham speak about being at places that claim they didn't have a blame culture, they had a revenge culture.
Yeah.
Or that so she asked some CTO or something one time if they had a blame culture there, and she said they said no. Who told you that? I'll go talk to them.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I worked
Hilarious.
on a contract where they were doing an agile transformation, and they decided they were going to adopt the idea of doing minimal viable products. And the goal of a minimal viable product is to learn something so that you can get better. And when they were done with their first MVP, they fired all the executives involved because they failed. They learned a lot, but we didn't really mean you could fail.
The other thing that I see happen all the time is people like deciding that technology is like going to fix those people problems and those internal political problems all on its own, and it's not going to do that. You can't solve people problems with technology, right? It really takes communication and like building a culture of like openness and honesty that actually drives change. And
the Joanna Rothman, the 80% of your DevOps problems or Agile problems are actually HR problems, and the other 20% are different HR problems.
Yep.
He is correct.
It's actually really interesting, Tom, when you talked about automated test being one of the leading challenges you saw. What I've seen in some of my implementations and some of the organizations I've helped with this, it's automated test and some of the technical depth that teams have focused on. The technical depth they usually get lost in and they hide in. They actually will retreat to their corners and say, we know how to do IT operations really well, better than you don't know what you're talking about. We know how to do configuration management. We know how to do automated tests. But the point that you guys are talking about around how the people and the culture comes together, I think has been the biggest challenge I've seen. And I'm curious about something you said, changing the incentive is really interesting to me, because we try to push and we try to talk to the organizations about aligning the outcomes that you're focused on. How can we, as a security team, as an IT team, as a dev team come together and focus on how the organization is succeeding in the mission or the business succeeding in your revenue goals, as an example, not how you're developing and releasing software faster or how you have a more stable infrastructure, right? And what kind of incentives have you guys seen? What have organizations done that you've seen that have been helpful in that regard? I'd just be really fascinated if somebody has said, we need to incent people differently in order to focus and change the culture of how our people work together. Because I haven't seen that very successful really in any of my history.
I think that the big places where I see that work successfully now, you know, particularly with large organizations, a transformation of anything is uneven. So there will be some groups there that do better than others, but I think it gets down to having people who are in authority, who are in control, executives. Will they actually do things like when someone says that this is a problem and we need to stop and fix it, will they back them up or will they not back them up? When a mistake happens and you want to have some kind of like blameless retrospective where you focus on the mistake and what can we do to learn from that mistake rather than whose fault it was and then firing the person who you think whose fault it is, do the executives actually shield the teams from the rest of the organization that needs to have that mindset change and is just looking to fire someone? So do you have the people who have like the authority within the organization buying into that and changing? And I think that's where, you know, you can have a lot of groundswell transformation, but once when you're going from the bottom up, once you hit the layer that won't let you go anymore and will hold you accountable to the old incentive system and the old culture, that's when you're going to start to see a lot of those bottom-up systems fail. So, you know, I don't know that I've actually seen that work across an entire large organization, but certainly groups within that, they've had people who took on that responsibility to be the person who lived up to that change and changed the incentive system for their part of the organization.
I think in the government space, you know, a good example, Mark Schwartz, who worked at CIS years ago now, really did a lot of changing. He wanted to change technology and how it was, you know, implemented and built and supported citizenship and immigration services. And one of the ways he did that was fixing procurement or trying to fix procurement. I think that he did a good job of, you know, instead of looking at things as, you know, we're stuck with whoever we have for 5 years because that's the contract, looked at smaller ways to evaluate organizations and teams and provide flexible ways to get services. So if one person or one group is not really achieving that, you have flexibility and can make and adjust and tune quicker. I think that kind of in the federal space, at least, the large procurement cycles end up facilitating a culture that is anti-agile, if you will, and you know, makes these changes harder.
Yeah, I think I heard him speak one time that he said that if he could get everyone on a 90-day review cycle, that the contracts were reviewed every 90 days instead of every 5 years or every year for an option year, that the this is, you know, Tom's reward and reward system in the culture, right? If they had to produce every 90 days and show that they were trying and producing, the typical contractor attitude on a government contract would be very different than we see today.
Yeah, he actually made some strides with that, with some of the contract vehicles that he put into place, some of which I remember we heard about when he was thinking about them, but then later came about place. And like one of the personifications of that, also another change he did was I think the tech challenges. I don't know if he was directly responsible for that, but certainly he had some influence over it.
The other thing in like a smaller sense, like within an organization, is we tend to focus a lot when we talk about incentives on the sticks and what, you know, like what we can do to like gate change and prevent people from making bad change, or you know, kind of getting the person who introduced a broken bit of change to be the one to fix it, is to deal with the carrot side of that and actually make sure that the person who should be making changes is able to make the changes of that and has the authority and God, I'm losing the word, the ability to actually go ahead and make those changes. Then they get rewarded for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I mean, I've seen small organizations where they actually empower teams, and the teams are able to make decisions. And I've seen teams decide that, this guy Rob isn't working out, and we have to get rid of him. And this is the steps we went through, and the team decided on all that. And so, and they felt supported by the organization enough so that they could do those things. And they didn't have to have some manager come in and tell them, this is what you do now to put someone on a performance plan and then decide that they're not going to work out. So I do agree with Cassandra. It is it's both the carrots and the sticks that you have to think about, and think about how do you change those to convince people that they should, or incent people so that they should work the way that the system's meant to work. We all know we're human beings, and we'll try to find a way to game the system so we do the least amount of work to get the most amount of reward.
You also don't want to push people into like learned helplessness, where they just feel like they're beaten all the time.
Yeah.
I work in the federal government. There's a lot of learned helplessness. This is another fascinating conversation, in my opinion. How do you incent people, organizations, teams from the bottom up and from the top down to kind of shift and change their thinking? And I think that some people are very interested and excited about that modernization and change. And I think some people are very reticent to, this is the way we've always done things, so we're not going to change. And this has always worked for us, so I'm not interested in the change. And that's why it's been challenging for me. So that topic of incentive and how you get people to think differently is really fascinating. I mean, technically, most engineers, most developers, most people in that spectrum are always interested in growing and getting better. But a lot of times, parts of the organization that have always operated in a certain fashion, they just don't like to shift and change, and it's always been kind of challenging. It's taken my team's time to get them to change their thinking and shift the way they think. You get there, but it's just, how do we accelerate that pace, I think is what my interest is.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is it's really hard to accelerate that pace, because even the people that support you, they've always got that hedge. Well, if this doesn't work, I'll just say that I always thought the old way of doing it was fine. And the people who oppose you are vehemently opposed to you. And we all want people to go faster and to adopt things quicker, but human beings need time to change. And even those who want to do it take time. Sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old saying. It's the hardest thing to cultivate is a new idea, because you only make half friends of those that it benefits and enemies of the old guard.
Yeah. That's absolutely true.
I mean, to make the carrots work in any culture, it's not I threw a big bonus at you at the end of the year, right? It's consistency in acknowledgement and fulfillment of whatever you're doing. So, I think, the one and done is a lot less successful, from a carrot and incentive side than, people feeling, the small win, the small incentives and small support consistently is just a lot more effective.
Yeah, if you look at like Drive by Daniel Pink, people aren't motivated by, once you have a certain amount of money, people aren't motivated by more money, or it isn't a prime motivator. People are more motivated by, can I work on something that I value? Can I work on my own schedule and time frame? Do I have mastery over that? And, am I appreciating the work that I do? So there's a lot, to really get good work out of people, you've got to focus on some of those intrinsic motivators rather than just the extrinsic, we'll give you more money.
Yeah, I mean, getting the technologies and support to do and experiment and learn is another one of those things that I think is really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So getting back to Cassandra's talk, I'm actually, one of the things I had asked about earlier was around that idea of massive monolith to microservice and kind of the journey and transformation of an organization and how they think and how they tactically get from one to the other. We see that a lot with our customers. And I'm really interested in not only that, but on the Kubernetes side, kind of the source of the discussion, when you have an organization that has not embraced Kube, they're not doing containerization at all, they're not doing that kind of architecture in their deployment, what's the best way to get them from one to the other? Like, is there a roadmap? Is there a journey? Is there a strangulation pattern for taking a piece of a monolith and then taking that into a service-based deployment and saying, we're going to start in this way and show and prove success? And then once you can see it and you understand the success, we can start to grow and adopt that and take more of your architecture toward that. Is it a Big Bang Theory? Like, what has been your guys' experience in taking customers tactically from the old way of thinking to the new way of thinking, and what's kind of the roadmap and journey?
I mean, for me, I think it's if you can prove or show success. So one of the places that I worked at where, and Cassandra was there as well, they had told us, they were an embedded medical device, and they told us it was impossible to do continuous integration. That just won't work here. And they said, well, we asked them, how do you do builds? And they said, well, Nan does builds. We're like, okay, well, Nan's a human being. She's going to be gone sometimes. And they're like, oh, she'll just teach someone how to do it, and then they'll do it while she's gone. So Nan went on vacation. And this, at the same time, we were kind of fighting with them about whether we should actually even do continuous integration or not. And Nan had taught this guy Raj to do builds. And like the first day Nan's gone on vacation, Raj has a family emergency, he has to go back to India. The third day, they came to us and said, we need a build. And we're like, okay, well, who can do builds now? No one. What are you going to do? Well, we'll wait for Nan to come back. After that point, they never argued with us again whether we needed continuous integration or not. And Cassandra was working on that project. And I think it took her, 2 weeks or a month or something to figure out all the problems with this embedded system and get continuous integration working.
I think it took a lot longer to get it to do like the automated deployments onto the
that was the next fight we had with them. We were like, we want to do some continuous delivery, and after we build this, we want to deploy it. And the first thing they said to us, mirror of what they said originally, is that's impossible to do. You can't do that here. And then it took you like maybe a month or 2 months to figure that out, but far from impossible.
We ended up with racks of those devices like set up to actually make that feasible.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that got them to stop arguing with us was when we showed them that it actually works. And part of the reason we got to the point where we could show them that it actually works is the things that they said would never happen and that we'll always be able to build, because there'll always be someone here who knows how to do it, failed within a month of us getting there and saying this is one of the things we should do.
Yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised at Cassandra's story about the tipping point, because I think I have seen that pretty much everywhere we've been successful, but it's always been more of a crisis that's forced the aha moment to that tipping point, rather than the, hey, we just started seeing the light, we gradually got past that point and started shifting.
I left the crisis out of the story, Gene.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of them.
Yes, it could be a series of crises. Yes.
We knew you were hiding something.
People usually don't, unless the ship's on fire and sinking, they don't want to jump. They don't want to make a move until it's a crisis and there's no other way.
Well, part of it is, we teach it in the DevOps course. Or in that course we had the deviation of the normalization of deviance. Right. By Diane Vaughn. If you can keep doing something suboptimal and never get penalized for it, eventually that becomes normal. So you keep doing it, right? You have to basically, if you don't get smacked down every now and then for doing something stupid, you just assume you can always do that stupid thing, that that's the right thing to do. And a lot of the aha moments are you getting smacked down saying, oh, wait, yeah, this was the wrong thing to do and we knew it, or we should have known it.
So to the earlier point about incentives, we put the gates in place and started smacking people down for doing the wrong thing pretty early. But that didn't force anyone to adopt anything because it was still possible to do it the old way, because like it was still easier to do it the old way. And so regardless of the fact that we were smacking them down constantly, they still wanted to hold to the old way, even though it was like hurting them to do it.
Well, it gets back to what you said about the blame culture, right? So
Yeah.
if you're overloaded and you're stressed and you find that blaming someone else is a strategy to success to get you not being the person with the focus on right now, you're going to keep going back to that well as much as you can.
So
Right.
what finally got them to stop in at least one way was when they could suddenly start doing it for themselves, and it became like less painful and easier to just do it and do it right than to try to find somebody else to blame for why it didn't work.
Yeah.
I think that's really what the tipping point was.
So do you think that's that kind of addresses the tipping point and the incentive mode? Do you think that's a viable approach, is to try to get it so that the path of least resistance is to adopt rather than to fight the adoption?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, if you can get there, then that could be a good strategy for success.
Yeah, unfortunately, usually that's way down the road and hard to get that far without the support in the first place. So
It was fully 2 years into this project before that we hit that point, right? So
It usually takes a really strong, like, executive sponsor that's willing to call people on not attempting and trying to do the new, right?
So
When you fall back to the normal or to the things that are slowing us down or to the things that are preventing progression, somebody to say, who's in a position of authority, hey, why are you doing that shit? Why don't you try it a different way? Why don't you try it a new way? If there's no psychological safety, if there's a blame culture, people are afraid of trying something new. People are afraid of trying to step out because they know they're going to get smacked, and they're simply looking for a way to say, I'm doing what I always do because I know that's safe. But you've got to break that mold. You really have to break that and get somebody to say, we're going to push people to do the new thing, and we're going to be okay if they try something and it doesn't work. You have to have that.
we
Well, I
actually
think-
had it happen the other way. We never had an executive sponsor that really that was really ready to push the adoption of the new technology. What we really had was like the teams themselves had to start to adopt it on their own, and the executives kind of tailed the organization, and they were the last people to come on board, not the first.
I know at CIS, that's one of the stories where we did have a lot of top cover. And because of the federal environment, that was one of the few ways that change could actually occur. Without that top cover, people just wouldn't do it, right? Because they didn't have to. There was no incentive. They were the only, because of the way federal contracting works, they were the only people who were going to get the recompete, right? And so without the government taking a strong stand against the stuff that was going on, there was no other way for change. But I have seen in the commercial area where you can have a little bit more merit to it. And I don't know, that's just my experience.
You're just reinforcing my belief that there are no technical problems. They're all people problems.
Oh, that's not true. Oh yeah, no. That is not true.
just because there's plenty of people problems doesn't mean there's not also technical problems.
It's compounding. It's people problems on top of technical problems, or the other way around.
In the end, though, there are very few things that fail because of technical problems in the software industry.
Yes, I agree with that.
You know, almost all failure in the software industry gets back to people problems.
Thumbs up, +1.
So I have one more question. What do you guys think the cost of doing stuff like data center in the cloud, right? Rather than going cloud native, or doing we're moving our monolith to microservices as a distributed monolith, the kind of taking the suboptimal path. You know, I always think there's a lot of this is attacks that we bring on ourselves.
Right.
What do you think the cost of something like, you know, like I said, like data center in the cloud instead of doing cloud native stuff? How bad a tax is that?
I think it's a pretty bad tax, right? So if you do AWS like you did your own data center, particularly where you had physical boxes that were maintained forever, it's going to end up being more expensive. And I think that what you're seeing in the industry right now, I think microservices is in a different place than data center or cloud, is that organizations who've tried to go to the cloud and kept their data center practices intact are starting to say, why are we doing this? Let's start talking about moving back to our data center because it was cheaper. So that backlash has happened somewhat. And it's going to take a while for, you know, in the hype, the kind of the Gartner hype cycle, it's going to take a while for people to go through that valley of disillusionment to get back to where actually working in the cloud and using the cloud the way it has advantages, and particularly cost advantages, has to happen. I think microservices are new enough so that there are a lot of people doing distributed monoliths and saying they're microservices. And you know, you're just starting to see articles now that talk about don't do microservices for those reasons. And so I think that's still got a little more uptick on the hype cycle to go before it starts going back down, where people are saying, you know, for a lot of applications, you don't actually need microservices. I worked on this proposal, and we actually worked on this project where the sales cycle, and this was a few years ago, the sales cycle was, we have to tell them how many microservices we're going to have in this application. And I tried to talk to the proposal team and be like, you know, microservices is an implementation detail. It doesn't necessarily make sense in a proposal of a high-level architecture to talk about how you implement modularity as microservices. And they're like, yeah, you're exactly right, but how many will there be? And so I think that's going to have another cycle through where it's like people realize that what we've really built in a lot of cases are monoliths. And just Derek, you were talking about like 12-factor applications, and I think if you look at like 12-factor applications, microservices, even REST services, a lot of people have heard them, know a little bit about them, but don't really know what they're about, didn't read any of the foundational material on them, and they're building those things wrong, and then turning around and saying that technology doesn't actually work. And that's where you see the hype cycles. You have the first people building them and you see success out of it. Then you have people who follow along, don't really understand it, but try to use it anyway, and then saying it doesn't work. So
that's funny, Tom, because I see that all the time in test automation and testing and everything else. Like that's not specific to, I mean, any of those things. That's,
yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, that's just common across the software industry, period. In every.
I agree. Right. I mean, test automation is really just code that tests code. Everything about code that's true is true about test automation.
Gene, I think kind of to your original question, I think data center in a cloud or doing something that's not like the perfect end goal for how we're implementing for a customer can be dangerous. So what I've tried to do with customers I've helped and things we've done in implementation, you try to inform them and talk to them about the optimal way to get there. I think that it's almost as dangerous to try to go from massive monolith to perfectly handcrafted bespoke microservices that are autonomous and own all their own data, like in one step. I think there's a lot of risk in doing that, because between here and there's so many opportunities for the organization to say, fuck this, it's not going to make it, right? And they just drop the whole thing. So we tried to do a bit of a journey to get there. Let's start small and show you how to go. And when they start to make bad decisions, you inform them ahead of time. Hey, don't lift and shift all your applications over, because you're going to end up spending more in the long run than you would if you do it this way. And we've had customers say, pound sand, that's the way we're going to go the fastest. And when they end up spending more money, they come back to us and they've said, you were right. Like, we spent more money. That was a bad idea. How should we do it differently? Well, let's talk about the way we talked about it originally. So I think that being forthright with your customers, talking to them about the reality of what they're doing, how they're doing it, what the end goal looks like, how to get there in the right path, to me is the right way to do it. I think that a big jump for some customers believe we're going to transform everything and let's do that in one fell swoop. And that can be successful if everybody's on board and you've got the money, time, energy, everybody's committed to doing that. But it's very rare that you've got that kind of support and that kind of drive.
And I think more often we see companies or organizations that say, we're willing to do that. We can change anything you want. So great, let's change this process. So not that process. We don't own that process, but anything else you want. Okay, can we do it this way? No, that's not approved. Let's stick, you can do anything you want as long as it's right
in this boundary,
exactly this point, but anything else.
TSA, we saw that, Gene, right? Where it's, hey, we want everyone to use the cloud and be able to, experiment and go, but I'm going to need 12 tickets and an architecture diagram and 4 of these forms before I'll talk to you about maybe spinning up a VM for you.
Yeah. And I do think that a lot of it is you do as much evangelism as you can. You try to explain. And that's kind of why I've gone to the idea of trying to explain that this is a tax you're paying, right? I tried to, TSA was a perfect example. We finally got Chef Server installed after I'd been on the project for over a year. And they said, hey, this is great. What a great success. It's been about a year. We finally got Chef Server. This represents a year worth of work. And I said, well, hold on. I do want to make it clear. It's been a year, but you told me I was allowed to do this right after lunch, and it's, 2:00 now. So it's just about a half hour of work that we did. It just took you a year of your tax to finally give me the go ahead to do this. And you have to understand that that's what you paid, right? We could have done this literally a year ago and had it done that first afternoon, but you decided not to do it that way. And there's a real cost to keeping all those same processes and all the same forms and, all of that around. And I don't think most organizations understand how hefty a price that is. I think they think they're paying a tax when in reality they're paying, a tax of it.
Yeah, I think that they start to trust you and they start to believe when you tell them you're going to pay this much of a tax if you continue to do it this way. You remember a year ago, we could have done this and we didn't. So a year later, we got this implemented. What you're telling me is going to cause another year of delay, right? They start to trust you and they start to believe what you're telling them. And sometimes that just takes time. It's challenging. It sucks, but sometimes that takes time.
Is there a better way than having to wait an entire year? And I mean, look, I've used value stream mapping before in order to show, look, it's 3 months of paperwork for 5 hours worth of actual work before, and to some limited success. But there's got to be a better, and it's an open question. Has anyone seen anything better than just waiting?
No, I don't have a perfect answer, but what I can tell you is one of the things that drives people to wait so long is the fear of failure. It's both the fear of failure and the remembrance of failure, right? And you might have somebody who's making the decision who, when the server went down because they didn't follow all the proper guidelines, it was really bad and really expensive, but that was 10 years ago. And now with the advent of virtual machines and snapshots and backups that take faster than 4 days, the risk is actually a lot smaller than what the perceived risk is. And I find that that's one of the things that keeps people in their bad habits. They don't realize that things have changed.
Yeah, I have found that trying to show whether, do the work outside of, let's say it's GovCloud, right? Try to do the work outside of their work stream and try to show a generic example of doing something similar. Say, look, if you sit with me for an hour, we'll build the whole thing out from scratch over here. And it won't be exactly the same. And there'll be some, extra security agents or extra other things you want. But not only don't we need a lot of those taxes, we're also, the risk is a lot smaller than you think, kind kind of what Glenn was saying, right? The perceived risk is high. The real risk is pretty low. And if we do this the worst way possible, we've wasted, to Max's example, 5 hours, right? So why don't you just give me 5 hours, right? And I promise we'll take no more than 5 extra hours to get it back if I blow it. So can you invest 10 hours to save that, 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is? But they're not always willing to take it. They're not always willing to fight the fight. So.
Too, I think it gets back to that story about the 5 monkeys and the bananas.
Oh.
Right. So I can't take credit. Gene told me about that, but I don't know if he made it up or not. But.
I did not, but yes, that's a good example of, we do it this way because that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah. And, people just buy into it. They don't even think about it anymore.
Well, nobody gets fired for buying IBM. So there's that.
Yes, there's a lot of that around still.
Yeah. Well, but it's also true, though. Right? So at a lot of organizations, it's more important to not fail than it is to succeed. And if no one gets fired for buying IBM, why would I risk it?
Which is back to your comment about the incentive system. If you don't change the incentives to make it more valuable to succeed than just to not fail, then why would you take the risk at all?
Yeah.
Would you like to say goodnight to
The
the
payoff's the same.
Would you tell Stop?
So.
All right.
I gotta go, guys. Take it easy.
Lana.
Hey, Lana.
Hi, Lana.
Everybody says hi.
Lana.
All right.
We're waving to her, Glenn, not you.
Yes. Thank you. All right, guys. Take it easy.
All right. I think I should sign off too, but it's great to meet you all.
Very nice to meet you, Tim. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. I will get this recording put up tomorrow. And thanks. It was great discussion. Cassandra, great to see you again. Thanks for stopping by, and Tom and Alan. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a good night.
Thanks for the talk, guys. Good night.
Yep. Thanks all. Thanks, Cassandra. Bye.